Hey, geographers, we're continuing. We're over halfway through a unit on agriculture. Today, we're going to talk about the von Thunen model. There should be those little umlauts over the U. I'll give you some papers with images of the modern von Thunen model in school this week, so you'll see it on that. Also, I'd have to restart my computer to get the webcam working, and you can just be happy you don't have to see my face today. All right. So, who was this von Thunen guy? There's a little sketch of him there. He was a German agriculturalist and economist. Uh, think of, sort of during the Industrial Revolution times, earlier in that, think what was going on in the US at this time, right? Like the time between the revolution and the Civil War, so to speak. Now, unfortunately, when he was 2 years old, his father passed away, and his mom did remarry. But think of like the feudal system of what we would call Germany now today. So he had this estate that he was left from his father. So, out of interest in learning the best way to run and take care of and manage this estate, he began studying rent, land use, and wages, and all that sort of stuff. So he was not known for being a professor or anything like that, but he was a scholar. He wrote books about this, and that's why he's known as one of the preeminent agricultural slash economists of this time. So I'm going to give you an example for those of you who like looking at things at a more mathematical mind. He had this formula here in the bottom, which, you're not going to be tested on this. This is not going to be an AP question, but just for your understanding, because it's supposed to be like a college level course, right? So R stands for land rent. So how much you're going to pay to rent land. Y is the yield per unit of land. So how much grain is that land producing, so to speak? P is the market price per unit of that object. C is the production expense per unit, right? How much you got to pay out for it. Y is the yield per unit of land. F is the freight rate, right? How much it's going to take to ship it. And M is the distance to market. All right. So when I tell you this, right, that means basically the cost of land and the distance to market from that land, how much the price sells for that good and how much the transportation costs, that's going to affect how much your land costs. All right? That's why I tell you these things. So, principles of the model. That shouldn't be a quote. That should be those little whatever. All right. So, you want to understand these concentric rings here. Like I said, you can draw this out. I'll give you some copies itself. So, von Thunen, when he was in what Germany then was not Germany now, right? But think now it's Norman Germany. He spent most of his life in this area called Mecklenburg. He's originally from Ogdensburg, but he noticed that okay, if I go to the market and I buy goods, right? So you have like this center. Right around the center, you may have some growing of uh, some vegetables, maybe some fruits, maybe some dairy farming, not huge farms. Right around that, you'll have forests around the town. Around that, he noticed you'd see farmers with grains and field crops. And around that, you would notice ranching and livestock, right? So maybe more cows, but maybe ones that were used for meat, maybe some pigs and things like that. So, why are things there? Why are they where they are? What's the relationship? And he also noticed that how close things are to the market impacts how much we spend on them. We're going to discuss how a lot of things have changed, but that's still an element of truth, right? So we spend more money on land and labor in zone 1, and we spend less as we move away. So even back then, think of it was more intensive towards the center and more extensive towards the outer rings, right? You don't need to like don't be like I need to like write this down. Just understand that they were sort of like applying mathematical or scientific principles to where things were where they were and how that would affect their costs, right? If you go to school for economics, there's be all sorts of formulas. All right, not the classes I enjoyed the most. All right, so if you take that circle and you unroll it out, right, what are you going to see? So I sort of just took like a little screenshot here. In the center, you're going to have your market, right? And there you're going to have fresh goods. Once again, we're talking about, Deutschland in the 1830s or something here, right? Um, so that's also going to affect how much we spend on things, right? Um, you're going to have your fruits and your vegetables grown there, but it's because they have a short shelf life, right? Back then, you couldn't. It would take too long to get fruits or vegetables that were grown far away, right? You'd have to find a way to get it to the market quickly. The second ring outside there, well, like I said, you may have um, some dairy cattle, right? Some fruits and veggies grown outside the market. After that, you're going to have your forests. And that's mostly because you need building products, right? To make that market, to make that town, you're going to need lumber. That was the primary, you know, resource to make buildings at the time in that location anyway. And lumber is heavy, so you don't want it to travel a far distance if you're using like a horse and wagon back then, right? You're not using big trucks. So to maximize your costs and to build your community, the forests are going to be outside, right? There's a reason, there's a purpose. Then you have your third ring. You're going to have your grains. There's our farmer with our inaccurate corn stalk, right? Now think about it: wheat, oats, corn, whatever. The grains are not going to be as heavy as lumber. They're also not as perishable as things like fruits and vegetables, right? So it's not as heavy to transport. It's not as perishable. It can travel a bit further distance. Now we'll talk about like, well, then why, if you know your U.S. history, the Whiskey Rebellion, the farmers in Western Pennsylvania were converting their corn and their grains to whiskey because it was easier to get through the mountains, right? But we'll talk about that in a second, right? Because von Thunen was not talking about getting things through mountains at this point. And then in our fourth ring, we have our outermost ring, we have livestock. They need space, right? They need space to graze. Um, and when it was time to go to slaughter, you didn't have to try to get the meat there quickly. You could still walk them to market, and then they could be slaughtered there. Not a beautiful story, right? Now, so is this model still accurate today? In some ways it is, but in many ways it's not, right? So why are we learning about it if it's not accurate? Well, it's because you're learning the history of this, and you're trying to make sense of this, right? So here's an image, a little market in northern Germany in the 1850s. So you see people going to one central place to get their goods. You see the town surrounded. Remember that rings were based off the cost of bringing those things to market. So here's the assumptions under the von Thunen model. Land was basically all equal, right? Buying land in one area wasn't necessarily better or cheaper than other land. But if you look at this topographical map, remember he was from northern Germany? That's all flat. All right. So it wasn't harder to get goods through when you're not worried about crossing mountains, going over rivers, and things like that. There was also, assuming there was basically a single market, there was one central area you would go to buy your foods. You also want to be going to like markets in, a few towns over, right? You'd be going to the one in your town because, you didn't have cars. It didn't make sense to do that, right? And it also understands that transportation costs are based on the difference or the distance, right? So further away, it's going to take you, say, more days to get your goods to market, so it's going to cost you more. Or you have to do it more quickly because the things will perish, right? So, what has changed from these assumptions? All right, we're going to talk about 7 things. Today, when we look at where we get our goods, we don't just get it from a small area, we get it from all over the world. And the physical landscape varies, right? Access to water is not equal, for example. So that's going to make a difference. The climate also varies, right? If we're not just getting things from our neighboring areas. So think about getting fruits this time of year where you're not growing fruits in New Jersey, but because they're shipped from, subtropical areas, hundreds, if not thousands of miles away, because that can be done now, right? So that's going to change things. We also can get our goods from multiple markets now, whether it's different grocery stores, the local farmers market in town, whether it's, delivered from who knows where, from Amazon Prime or something like that, right? Some of these places should look familiar to you guys. You may have been to them once or twice. Other things to think about, this is still related to multiple markets, is that there's regional versus global, right? You still have a certain impact with regional goods. So this is a cranberry bog in South Jersey, and that still really impacts the culture. But you could also we also get a lot of global um, markets. Get things from all over the place as well. Right. Let's talk about the changes to transportation. We no longer need wagons and horses or oxen or whatever to transport our goods. We have 18-wheel trucks. We have ports like you see here in New Jersey, where these shipping containers come in from all over the world and then go in the back of 18-wheel trucks and go all over the place. Just not on Route 80 these days, right? Um, we have things get shipped by plane, things get shipped by train, right? All this transportation means goods can get placed more quickly, and it's going to affect the prices. Let's talk about technological advancements. Now, also related to transportation, a huge, huge invention during the Industrial Revolution was the refrigerated train car, right? Once you could, slaughter a cow in Chicago and get that meat to people in New York, that made a big difference, right? Or ship certain fruits that people maybe didn't have access to before. Once you could refrigerate your milk, that makes a big difference, right? Um, for good or bad, once you started adding preservatives to our foods, right? That's why some things you're like, why is the expiration date so long from now? Why does this milk that's supposedly milk not have to be refrigerated? You can thank these chemical additives and preservatives for that. Now, we'll talk about this. Because of this, that doesn't mean that we're always getting fresh foods. There's some parts we'll talk about, like desert zones, where, like, especially in certain inner cities, where people don't really have access to fresh food so much, but mostly just, processed foods. That's sort of related to a few different units that we can talk about when we talk about urban areas soon. I'll talk about the role of forests changing, right? Trees that were primarily used for buildings. Now, buildings, the number one resource is concrete. And if you understand this picture here before, trees are not just used for building, they're also used for things today like paper. That's the Dunder Mifflin office, right? Lastly, the purpose of agriculture products have changed as well. So we're not just growing things for the same reasons. So, for example, 90 million acres of corn in the United States, which comes to about 8% of our total corn production, which is actually a fairly high number. It seems like a single digit, so it's not high, but it's a good chunk, right? They're used to make sweeteners like high fructose corn syrup. None of you drink that Coca Cola. Let's not drink that. No. All right. So the purpose of agriculture has changed. Before you go, I know we had some questions about intensive versus extensive. I do want to go over that some more with you guys, but this might help with you to understand it a little bit better as well. If you think closer to the market, zone one, right? For any labor that's done there, the labor is going to cost more. the land is going to cost more. If you think you want to make a farm in New York City, good luck paying for that plot of land, right? Think of how much that product would cost. It doesn't make sense. Um, but as you move out of the zones, right, as you move away from the center, by the outer rings, that's extensive farming, right? Where the cattle ranches are, so to speak, right? The land is cheaper. Um, the labor is different. So this may sort of show you how these two things combine. All right, that is all about the von Thunen model. And like I said, I'll give you some handouts that show you more like how the von Thunen model looks in America today.